Hello, welcome to Fantasy Writing for Barbarians. I'm John Agroni, published fantasy author, professional writer for over 10 years, also editor too. Now, today I want to do something that we don't really do much here on the podcast slash channel, and that's talk about a video game a little bit more than usual. Specifically, I want to talk about the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Now, if you're not into video games, totally understand. This might not be the episode for you, but even if you don't know much about this particular game, this might still be pretty useful. And the tips I'm going to talk about are pretty universal as well, and you might find them interesting anyway. So I encourage you to stick around. But thesis for this was based on the fact that Oblivion, 2006 video game, and one of the real landmark video games to come out in the early, or I guess in that case, mid 2000s, right? I played it a ton when I was in late high school and early college. Really just poured a lot of hours into that game. And it, to me, was a total masterclass when it comes to interactive RPGs. And it got a lot of things right in terms of the world building, the writing, and all of that. And recently, just last month, in fact, the remaster for the game came out. And I won't nerd out on all that stuff. There's plenty other, videos and things you can look into. But I specifically want to talk about what we can learn from Oblivion Remastered, what it can teach us about fantasy writing in ways that maybe other media can't do as well. So obviously books and even graphic novels and all kinds of other things can teach us a lot about fantasy writing. There are so many great examples. We talk about it here all the time. But I do think that video games also offer up some helpful resources, especially because a video game is so fun and addicting that a lot of the time you're picking up on things about writing and world building subconsciously. And Oblivion Remastered is just another really fun way to do that if you're really into gaming in particular. Although I do know a lot of people who don't know that they're into games as much until they play one of the Bethesda games from this era, specifically, I would say Oblivion. A lot of you even then might be more familiar with something like Skyrim, but Oblivion itself, I think, has a lot of stuff in it that is, I would say, more instructive and actually kind of leans on some old school charms that Skyrim doesn't quite in the same way, at least in my opinion. So let's get into it. Now, I could have done more of a video essay format. I've done stuff like that before. It takes so much time, though. It's so difficult. I don't have the time. So what I thought I would do instead is just kind of share my screen of a little bit of like the gameplay so you can have some kind of reference if you're watching this on the YouTube. And of course, if you're listening, you don't have to see all this stuff to get it, I guess. So that's good at least. So you'll see it pop up in here as I talk about what I want to talk about, specifically Oblivion, right? So again, I want to talk about what I think Oblivion actually did teach me about fantasy writing, even before I was writing fantasy novels, back when I was playing the original in 2006. And I've been replaying Oblivion Remastered, of course. I've been really much enjoying it. A lot of, sleepless nights when I should have been sleeping. I was playing this game. And honestly, I kind of realized that, wow, this might still be one of the best written fantasy experiences you can get in a video game. There are plenty of great contenders. Don't get me wrong. The Witcher 3 is probably going to come up for a lot of people. I'm much myself partial to Elden Ring and different kinds of flavors of fantasy too, like BioShock and BioShock Infinite, for example. But I do want to stick to Oblivion Remastered because I think that there are some really key details about it that can teach us fantasy novelists how to ethically steal from the game, more holistically in a way that can make our books better. So let's start where any good fantasy novel should, I think, and that is with the world. So Oblivion, in my opinion, it's a masterclass, but not just in the ways that are probably most obvious. I think in living lore, that's where Oblivion kind of shines the most for me. And it's not just because you can find all kinds of books in the literal game and you can read them and everything, although that's its own kind of fun little side. I think if you're into it and you don't have to do it, but it's kind of fun. But also because to me, it feels like everything in the world of Cyrodiil, where the game takes place, it feels like everything has a past. The lore here is alive in the sense that it had to have been born, right? Because everything exists in space, there had to be something that preceded it. And that means that every guild that we come across, every chapel that you walk into, and of course, all of the ruins and dungeons you get to explore, they have these predetermined histories. They have these predetermined ideas and conflicts that you can read a lot into. What I like to do a lot when I play these games, in fact, is I like to, any good RPG, I like to do a little bit of a Dungeons and Dragons thing where I craft an entire backstory for my main character and I write alongside the game. I write little things in my head, and I've even talked while playing the game. Producer Bridget Surdog knows this because I've told them about it, and they haven't gotten into the game themselves, but specifically, I'll talk more in the voice of my character instead of like the predetermined dialogue that is written in the text and everything. So to me, that's a lot of fun. And the fact that you can do that in this game, you can make it your own in that way, that just shows you how the world is immersive because it invites the player to be part of the story. That's something that we as storytellers in book format, in the written word and prose, can also do ourselves. And it's good if we do that for sure. And I would say too that one of the biggest challenges that you're going to find when you're writing a fantasy novel, many of you have experienced this already, is that you have to, in some ways, make the world feel bigger than your story. Makes sense, right? I mean, it's a whole world. It should feel big, and easier said than done, though. But I would say that Oblivion does pull this off super well. We're in one province, but the entire continent feels alive. It feels like there is this bigger world where a lot of things exist that you'll never get to go see yourself, but they're still there, right? And Oblivion also pulls this off with what I would call implied history, right? Kind of what I was talking about before, where you can walk into, for example, these eyelid ruins, and no one has to explain to you that you are trespassing somewhere that's kind of ancient, that's kind of dangerous. No, the architecture explains that. It shows it to you. Where the enemies show up, their placements, even loot tables, right? It does all that work in just the basic setup and structuring of these environments. You can tell so much detail and care got put into them. And I would say too that that kind of world building should be on every fantasy author's checklist. I think it should be a case where your novel isn't you just explaining your history and over and over again. It's your characters are discovering history or stumbling upon history, bleeding in your history. So I do want to talk too about some of the more specific plots and things. Obviously, with Oblivion, you have this open world. You can go to all kinds of places. You can do all these side quests. Some of the more popular things, even outside of the main plot line, all the factions, right? You have these like faction Uber quests, if that makes sense. And one of the most famous ones is the Dark Brotherhood one, and it's truly one of mine as well. And the guilds in general, oh man, what's cool about them is that they don't have to be epic to be immersive. They start off being very, very low stakes, very more grounded as compared to the main plot line where it's like the emperor is being assassinated. You got to go here. You have to go into hell. Like you have to do all these wild, epic things. But the guild faction quests aren't quite like that, at least at first, which is really, really nice because you do feel like when you are in the world and you're experiencing all the stuff going on that, yeah, you have a chance to kind of slow burn your way through a quest that becomes epic more naturally over time. And yeah, I would say too that Oblivion also understands as a game what it means to make your side stories matter. I wish more fantasy novels were able to do this as well. I think, especially in the current sort of commonality or common culture of people writing fantasy novels, there's this attention to not too many side plots, not too many side quests, not too many side characters. Just get to the point, just stick to one. And a lot of the time that happens because people get burned on these bloated stories that don't handle their side stuff very well. Oblivion, I think, could be really instructive, especially if you've already played it and you know what I'm talking about, as a nice reference point for how do those side stories in the main quest interact. Again, when I'm doing my Dungeons and Dragons thing and I'm playing the game, I find ways to be like, why would my character want to join the Dark Brotherhood or the Thieves Guild? Well, because I've crafted this whole backstory of like they need to collect these different types of powers and certain things in order to achieve a greater goal outside of the game. And so that's how I kind of work it out myself. And yeah, I think the fact that the game even lets you do that, or you can feel comfortable doing that, if you're me at least, is kind of a cool thing. And back to the Dark Brotherhood quest line in particular, I think that people sort of, chalk it up to like, oh yeah, you get to be an assassin. Isn't being an assassin so cool? It is. But It's also a lot deeper than that. It really is this character study in trust, betrayal, and the cult of loyalty. It's actually a little bit Shakespearean, if I can be so bold. Literally, Lucien Lachance, just study that character in terms of how the villain in your story, or not even a villain, but like an antagonist, an anti-hero, just somebody who's shady, what you could do to write them in a way that builds presence. That is a character who's so good at that. Also, Dark Brotherhood has some really cool twists. I think some of the more satisfying ones in the Elder Scrolls games in general. And so you can also take a look at that because it can really help you kind of figure out the pacing of your stuff and how you can make it a little bit better in that way as well. And I would say too that part of the reason the twists work, especially in Dark Brotherhood, is that they're seeded really early and they pay off late in a way that works better than Thieves Guild, in my opinion. The Thieves Guild one is, I like the Thieves Guild overall, but the twists aren't as. But anyway, there are also a couple other factions too, right? You have the Mages Guild, you have the Fighters Guild. I always do the Mages Guild first because I always love being a mage in these games. I think the magic stuff is more fun. But I think the cool thing about the Mages Guild one in particular for Oblivion, especially opposed to Skyrim, is that it's not just, do a bunch of like hacking and slashing and then you get promoted, right? Because in Skyrim, like I think it's like an often memed thing that you literally don't even have to really do much magic in order to become the archmage in the Skyrim kind of thing. I guess it's fitting because Skyrim is such a, barbarian sort of thing compared to the Oblivion game, which is more all encompassing, I guess, in terms of, the lore, the culture of all the main characters because it has more of a Viking vibe essentially. But yeah, the Mages Guild in Oblivion is really cool because you get to uncover some like really deep conspiracies and corruption that aren't super obvious at first. You have a lot of tension between magical powers and councils, political restraint, and some interesting, ethical considerations about using magic a certain way, in fact. And it is the slower of the burns in terms of the guild quest lines, but I think the stakes feel pretty real for the Mages Guild in a way that I would absolutely love to see in more fantasy novels where you have a magical institution at the center of it. A lot of stuff is implied in terms of like why the Mages Guild itself, like the Arcane University, why it's such a bloated bureaucratic mess, and how until you came along, it's been kind of rudderless essentially. And then, of course, you come in and you wreak havoc. But yeah, I would say go back and play Oblivion's Mages Guild arc, especially in the remaster. It looks really great. It really is a textbook and how you can turn a sort of cozy setup, because it's really cozy being in those Mages Guilds and the university and all that. But you can turn it into more of a moral crucible, something that feels really like, danger in every corner. I would also say the Fighters Guild too. Not my favorite, but a little bit underrated. And I don't like to say things are underrated or overrated. In this case, one of my rare exceptions, because I think the Fighters Guild actually has some really cool underlying themes that people maybe gloss over sometimes about labor, exploitation, class warfare. People don't usually remember it as fondly, honestly, but I would say it has some of the more grounded storytelling in the entire game and also has some of the better humor, just in like sitcom kind of humor, I guess. And I would say too, if you want to write fantasy that is a bit more grounded in that way, you can intersect a lot of these themes in a similar way that is exciting. Because it's exciting to be like, all right, go on a quest to beat people up. But we have these like class and these deeper political themes about who gets paid to kill what, and that actually matters. Yeah, there's some cool stuff there you can sink your teeth into. And then yes, we do have to talk about the overall conflict, the Oblivion gates. And Oblivion, of course, it's the namesake of the game, and it's often remembered for the gates themselves. The remastered makes them look really cool too. They're literally hellish gates that tear open like through the sky. You get close to one, is appearing. I mean, it's such a cool way to, through atmosphere, these Oblivion gates feel like so big and daunting and deathly before you even walk through them. And that is just such a great example of how you can build that atmosphere even before you get to a location, how you can set things up, how you can talk about things in eerie ways before characters get to them themselves. I highly, highly recommend that people pay close attention to the way the Oblivion gates work, especially once you are in them and how hellish they feel, how you can walk through them, everything's fine, and then a bunch of minds come up and they could just kill you at any second. Even the plants try to kill you at times. And it's such a great contrast too, because it's not just that you're going into these hellish places, because, Elden Ring has that kind of thing, right? But in this game, you feel that these gates are out of place because when you're inside of them, oh my gosh, like you were in before you go inside of them, you're in these like really cozy towns, right? You can just be in this like sleepy area, people are going about their day, everything's fine. You walk outside and there's literally apocalypse happening on the doorstep, and some of these creatures are going to come out, and if you're not careful they can kill some of the npcs, and including quest npcs at times. And it's kind of wild. It makes the danger feel real, that like right off the side of the road is oh, look, it's just an apocalypse right there for me, and it's up to me, the hero. Like I see these places and I'm like, I'm going to shut them down. I'm going to make that sacrifice and put myself in danger. It's not going to be that hard, but I'm going to do it because, I'm level 33 or whatever I am. So yes, if your fantasy novel has demons or monsters or war and all this stuff, don't just drop the reader into the chaos and expect them to feel the chaos and danger. You want to make them feel peace first. That's really, really important, because then when you make them feel peace and you rip it away, the danger that you set up with your whatever hellish supernatural stuff, that is going to be peak. And that's what Oblivion does pretty well. So I guess the only other thing I would say too is the weird charm of Oblivion has to be talked about, because I just think the way that the game kind of comes across. And, if you're watching, you've probably seen like some of the old school charm stuff too, like the potato faces and all that. I love it so much. The voice actors and the way they do their performances, how goofy it is, how oblivious the townsfolk are. The game just has such a fun voice to it, a lot of times unintentionally funny. But yeah, like literally, like townspeople will be talking about the gray fox and they'll get very theatrical out of nowhere. And stuff like that really works because Oblivion isn't trying to be overly slick or perfect or cool all the time. It's just trying to be lived in, right? And when we write fantasy, we shouldn't always aim for the sleekest, most poetic prose and the cleanest dialogue. All these just, it's like when you're playing a sport and all you're trying to do is go for kill shots. When sometimes you just kind of have to slow down and pace yourself and reset things and seep in and savor in the world and then everything that's going on. So sometimes I think what can make a fantasy world, more memorable than anything else is its clunkiness, is how it can be disorganized and disheveled and awkward and then charming for those reasons. So in my opinion, you shouldn't sand down all the edges of a world. I think the awkwardness, if anything, can actually sharpen them quite a bit. So yeah, I would say, to close it all off, Oblivion Remastered to me is such a fun creative writing course for you, because it's fun, right? It doesn't feel like homework to just play the game and soak in the details. But one cool thing you can do when you experience any medium, reading, playing games, watching whatever, is paying closer attention to these things and, not just consuming them without thinking about them. Right. There is like a mindful quality to these experiences, these interactive experiences you can have that can teach you and that can stick with you. If you can ask yourself questions along the way and put yourself more into these experiences, it can stick with you in a way that when you're writing your novel, it's just gonna really pour into it. And I know we've talked before on this show about people who are worried about that sort of thing and say, well, I don't want to be unoriginal. I don't want all my influences to make my story feel less mine, to feel less original and like, oh, nobody's ever done this before. And I totally get that. We have a whole episode about that, about bringing your originality to the equation. But as my mentor, Kate Browning, also said on this very podcast months and months ago, it's original and it's yours because you wrote it, right? As long as you're writing it and you are coming at it from an honest place. All of those things that you're soaking in from your influences, it's going to be yours if it is your voice and the way that you put it together. So don't overly fret about these things. That's what editing and revising is for. If you come across something that's a little bit too similar in maybe one or two ways, but if you sweat it the entire time, you're not going to get anywhere, except for maybe playing some video games again instead of writing. So hopefully that doesn't happen. It already happened to me. I could have written a lot more this past month if it wasn't for Oblivion. But I did get to relearn some really cool classic lessons about fantasy from this game. And if anything else, one of the best lessons is that it reminded me that great fantasy isn't always about grandeur. It can also be about specificity. It can be about history and character. And more than anything else, even consequences for all the actions that you take when you're in that story. So if you want to write fantasy that is lasting, start by asking yourself, the same question that I think every quest in Oblivion tries to answer. And that's what happens when the world keeps turning, whether the hero wins or not, whether you're there or not, what can happen next? So thank you so much for watching this or listening to it. If you are a podcast listener, we're going to go back to advice prompts pretty soon. So if there's a topic or a question that you want me to get into, be sure to email me, fantasywritingforbarbarians@gmail.com. A lot of fun to do a little bit of something different today. But in the meantime, be sure to keep on writing if that's what you feel like doing.